Egypt's interim president Adli Mansour has sworn in a new cabinet. This is the first since the ouster of the Islamist president Mohamed Morsi by the military nearly 2 weeks ago. The new government, sworn in Tuesday, is led by Prime Minister Hazem al-Bablawi, who is an economist. It also features the promotion of Defense Minister General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to Deputy Prime Minister. He also retains the defense portfolio. The Morsi-appointed Interior Minister Mohammed Ibrahim remains in his post in charge of the police. Nabil Fahmy, who was Egypt's ambassador to the US from 1999 to 2008, becomes foreign minister. Now, for the latest, we're joined by Adel Mahrouki, who is in Cairo. Adel, has the interim government been sworn in? We believe at this point it may have been completed.
Yes, Famida, they have been entirely sworn in front of interim president Adli Mansour and the interim prime minister Hazem Bablawi. And the cabinet is, the formation itself is quite as expected or as was speculated during the past few days. There is no young blood as we expected. However, there is a significant presence for women and for Coptic Egyptians, which is might be one of the biggest cabinet that would include a number of women and Coptic Egyptians as well. After the swearing-in procedures, the interim president has met with the entire cabinet, trying to pave the road finally for Egypt's transition.
Now, Adel, you've made mention there that there's been no real surprises in terms of those appointments. But looking at one of them, quite interestingly enough, looking at General al-Sisi joining the cabinet, him now being the deputy prime minister, how is that viewed in terms of the military's intervention and their role in politics in Egypt? Well,
there have been some concerns among liberal powers beside that appointment. In a sense, the defense minister has stated several times that the army is not intending to be part of or take any role in politics. Even the latest statements for General or Marshal Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, which was only 2 days ago, he stated that this will happen, and he actually told the generals, you will see, this will not happen. So there are some concerns, but at the same time, there is a very big wave of admiration to the character of the general. Many Egyptians, particularly if we're talking about older generation, they are admiring him. They are comparing him with former President Gamal Abdel Nasser. They see a charismatic character, and there has been such a trend also when you speak to people in the street that if there is a fair democratic elections, they wouldn't mind to find al-Sisi one of the candidates. They would not mind voting for him. So, of course, it has made a lot of debate, but there is who supported and there's others. But the pro-Morsi protesters, they see it as what they have been warning, that the army will rule, the army will take the country by surprise and manage every piece of it.
Now, Adel, we still have a situation where the Muslim Brotherhood has refused to join this new administration. Is it likely that we see a smooth democratic transition, or do we expect more concern, especially considering we had more clashes emerge on Monday night in Cairo, and that's from supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood?
Yeah, well, at least 7 were dead and 261 injured in these clashes. And we spoke to the Muslim Brotherhood this morning, and they said that not specifying to the clashes, but the wave of protests and taking the streets and blocking roads will be part of the escalation they have been mentioning. So, no, they do not intend to be part of the interim government. They consider it as a betrayal to the democracy that brought President Mohamed Morsi to power, and the recognition of what they describe as a military coup. And they say they will continue the escalation until President Morsi returns, not only gets released, but to be returned as president of the country. And they will not accept anything or any form of transition except through their own parliament, through another parliament or legislative elections under President Mohamed Morsi. And if such a parliament in their terms sees the president inadequate, then this will be the only acceptable way to the Muslim Brotherhood to remove the president earlier than his term. But anything else is not an option so far with the Muslim Brotherhood.
All right, Adil, thank you very much. We'll leave it there for the moment. Thanks again for that update. But we'll continue to look at those continuing clashes in Cairo. There are still problems as a protest continue to demand Morsi's release. That's the former President Mohamed Morsi. 7 people, as Adil had mentioned, they have been reported dead and 261 injured in those clashes between pro-Morsi supporters and security forces on Monday. This came the same day the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State William Burns visited Egypt. Once again, Adil Mahrouki reports.
Bloodshed continued in Egypt when Morsi supporters rallied in the streets demanding his return to power. They blocked main roads in the city. As a result, some citizens clashed with them before the police troops came to reopen the streets for traffic.
Our plan is to escalate demonstrations until democracy returns, until legitimacy returns, which includes the return of the elected president.
International voices toppled the protests by asking for Morsi's release, with no specification for his return to the presidential palace. On Sunday, U.S. Deputy Secretary of State paid the first official visit to Egypt from the United States since Morsi's oust.
Morsi has been able to control Gaza and therefore Israel's security. That is why Germany was the first to call for his release. Then the United States followed, because right now Sinai is reignited with terrorist attack, which is a threat to everyone. There is no direct pressure on Egypt, but things like the IMF loan could be stalled for leverage.
The United States' credibility in Egypt disappeared, with both sides accusing it of supporting the other.
The United States is part of this conspiracy. William Burns is here in Egypt to manage the whole operation. He is here to check why it is taking so much time to terminate Morsi's rule. He is not on our side. This is nonsense, and releasing Morsi is not the issue. We are talking about the liberty of the 25th of January revolution.
Burns met the interim President Adli Mansour, Vice President al-Baradei, and Defense Minister al-Sisi. He warned Egypt of jeopardizing a rare second chance in democracy by targeting Morsi and his supporters. Burns' visit to Cairo has confirmed to the United States that it is losing its friends in Egypt. And while he supported reconciliation, the Muslim Brotherhood's insistence for Morsi's return to power pushes this option to a dead end. Adil Mahroui, CCTV, Cairo.
Now let's have a look at the other side of these demonstrations. As thousands of people in Egypt continue to stage protests across the country, there are always street vendors who make use of the situation to sell food, drinks or flags to protesters. It's become a stable source of income as demonstrations have not stopped for the past 2.5 years. CCTV's Yasser Hakim takes a look at the street vendors in Tahrir Square.
When political forces call for demonstrations in the streets, it's a worrying sign for most, but not the street vendors. They live off demonstrations.
This is the best time. You have thousands of clients in one place. Sales are good.
Ismail says cold drinks sell exceptionally well because of the hot weather. But Ismail and many others are not street sellers by profession.
I work at Ain Shams University. We haven't been paid for months, so I come here to sell cookies and sweets.
I am an unemployed accountant. I decided to sell here for income. It is better than a fixed salary.
You can find everything in Tahrir: food, drinks, flags, pins, and even face painting. Sellers here keep renewing their items according to developments. For example, the latest is a t-shirt criticizing Obama for supporting the deposed President Mohamed Morsi. And there's also a t-shirt for al-Sisi, and he's the one who orchestrated the ouster of Morsi. Vendors in Tahrir sell their products at a higher price than the usual, but protesters don't mind, as goods are always sold out.
I sell over 100 boxes of water a day when there are protests. Now it's calm. I sell only 8 to 10 boxes.
Not all vendors are only here to sell. Some have a political stand. They even gave out their products for free to the protesters when Mohamed Morsi was deposed on the 3rd of July. Yasser Hakim, CCTV, Cairo.
The United Nations has warned it will use lethal force against rebels should they march to the eastern city of Goma. Thousands of people have fled following fresh fighting between the army and M23 rebel fighters. The UN is now moving armored vehicles and other military equipment into Goma.
A desperate attempt to seek refuge, and for many, the regional capital Goma offers that sanctuary. Government troops have been fighting M23 rebels in recent days. The military claims to have inflicted heavy casualties on the rebels, but ordinary people are suffering too.
I was in my garden harvesting beans. I have a very sick daughter. When I was about to return home, I heard the rebels fighting. I ran and found my daughter and other relatives were gone.
As people flee, the UN mission MONUSCO is reinforcing its forces in Goma. The M23 took the city briefly last November, and the UN is determined that won't happen again. It's deploying an aggressive new force of 3,000 troops from Malawi, South Africa and Tanzania. Their mandate is to engage armed groups such as the M23. MONUSCO's commander says the force will take any measures necessary to stop the M23 advancing into Goma. But General Carlos Alberto dos Santos Cruz says it's not yet at full capacity.
About 3 weeks, the Malawi battalion will be here, and then we are going to have the intervention brigade in full operational capacity.
MONUSCO already has 17,000 peacekeepers in the DRC, the UN's largest peacekeeping mission. The exact date has not been given for the UN Intervention Brigade to begin operations in eastern Congo. But as violence escalates, the UN knows the humanitarian situation could worsen if action is not taken. Hilary Yesiga, CCTV, Kampala.
The Ugandan government says it's willing to negotiate with rebel movement, the Allied Democratic Forces, that follows recent fighting in the eastern DR Congo that's displaced thousands of people. Uganda's now deployed an army battalion to the border. CCTV's Isabel Nakiria has that story.
With tens of thousands of Congo refugees now in Uganda, Kampala says it's prepared to talk.
War is not a desirable option, and our government is ready with open arms to talk to anybody who has grievance, whether you are ADF.
But Onek says the ADF does not have a genuine political cause.
Those who are behind ADF are hidden, and they are just used as tools to fight other people's wars. That's what I know. It is this fundamentalism which is being pushed to forcefully kind of, change the demographic character of our society here.
The ADF was formed in the early 1990s and claims it's fighting to create an Islamic state in Uganda. The group was driven from Uganda and now has bases in eastern DRC. Uganda's army claims the ADF has links to Al-Qaeda and that its members have been trained in bomb making. Fighting between the ADF and the Congolese military flared up last week. Around 70,000 people fled to Uganda. The UN's refugee agency says 8 groups were caught unawares. It says the exodus was the biggest single influx Ugandan authorities have faced so far. Isabel Nakiria, CCTV, Kampala.
Now, to discuss this further, we're joined by Nick Harper, who's in New York. Nick, looking at what the UN said most recently, they plan to reinforce their troops in Goma and the DRC, and as they say, use lethal force. How exactly do they plan to do this?
Well, they already have 17,000 peacekeepers in the country, the largest force that they have anywhere in the world. And on top of this, they're in the process of deploying these 3,000 troops, what they're calling an intervention brigade, to the eastern part of the DRC. These are troops that are made up from South Africa, Tanzania and Malawi. And they're hoping that they will be able to disarm and neutralize the rebels, to actively take on these rebel groups and use lethal force. We've been told that they are being allowed to use any necessary measures and they're ready and prepared to do so. But of course at this stage they're not quite up to full strength. They've got about 70% of those 3,000 troops on the ground at this stage, and they're hoping by the end of the month that they will be fully up to the 3,000 number.
Now, considering the widespread fighting in the area, is it not difficult and dangerous? And as you've mentioned, they aren't up to full strength. Considering all of that, is it not dangerous then to launch this offensive in that area?
Well, absolutely. You have to consider the type of terrain that they'll be dealing with. We're talking about mountainous region, desert areas, very remote places, places that are difficult enough to travel to, let alone fight in. So that will be a concern for the United Nations and for those troops that are going there. The United Nations is always very careful to try and make sure that the peacekeepers and the troops in this situation are kept safe. One other thing that they'll have to contend with, of course, is the fact that there are a large number of different militia rebel groups in the area, not just the M23 rebels who they are hoping to deal with around the city of Goma, but also a number of other smaller groups. But we are told, the theory is that the United Nations intervention brigade will be better prepared. They will have a stronger military presence. For example, we're told that they've been given 2 attack helicopters by the South Africans. So in theory, they'll be better prepared and better armed than the rebels on the ground.
All right, Nick, just before we wrap up, do we know the reasons behind this latest move by the UN, just to give us some background regarding the operations there? I don't know if you're able to...
In terms of the reasons about why they wanted to do it, I think quite simply this is a situation that's been dragging on for more than 10 years, and during that time they have had a presence in the DRC, and it seems that the United Nations has quite simply got to a point where they're fed up with what's been going on there, the skirmishes, the militia groups causing problems. So they want to be able to send in a team who are able to deal with, to disarm the rebel groups as best they can. But of course, as I've mentioned, they will be putting themselves at significant risk. But they obviously feel, the United Nations, that it is a risk that is necessary, and they want to try and protect the civilians who are there. They're worried about the city of Goma at this stage. That's the city that the M23 rebels took briefly last year and then pulled out of. And now, once again, we're seeing the rebel groups advancing on that city. And the worry from the United Nations is that the civilians within that city will be at great risk. So they want to do all that they possibly can to protect those civilians, especially considering the fact that talks between the M23 rebels has broken down in Uganda. So it's a risk, but one that the United Nations clearly feels is worth taking.
All right, Nick Harper, thank you very much for your time. We'll leave it there for the moment. Nick Harper there in New York. Well, Africa Live takes a quick break. When we come back,
the SADC region will accept the outcome of the polls because the people will have spoken.
Southern African regional body calls for free and fair elections in Zimbabwe. Welcome back to Africa Live. Now, the Southern African Development Communities called for free and fair elections in Zimbabwe. The 15-member regional body has sent an observer mission ahead of the poll due on the 31st of July. The mission's head, Bernard Members, told Zimbabwe the world is watching. CCTV's Farai Mokatuya has more.
SADC has a 446-strong observer mission on the ground in Zimbabwe. It's expected to issue its assessment of the vote within 2 days of the polls closing. The mission is clear about its expectations.
If these elections will be conducted in an atmosphere free, fair and credible, the SADC team and the SADC region will accept the outcome of the polls because the people will have spoken.
Elections 5 years ago were disputed and plagued by violence. SADC has been mediating since then. It negotiated the creation of a coalition government and pushed for political reform, including a new constitution that was passed in March. SADC hopes that Zimbabweans can replicate the peaceful conduct of a constitutional referendum in March so this election can be given a clean bill of health. A credible election is crucial to Zimbabwe normalizing relations with the international community and for the country to move forward. Farai Mwakutuya, CCTV, Harare, Zimbabwe.
The Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General for Somalia, Nicholas K., arrived on Saturday for his first visit to Puntland since he assumed his duties as head of the UN Assistance Mission in Somalia in June. K met with Puntland President Abdirahman Mohamed Farole and other government officials at the State House. He explained UN's mandate, which supports the building of national capacity, peace building, good governance, providing mediation and political reconciliation. Kay noted that Puntland has played a major role, or key role rather, to end the transitional period for Somalia, and that he looked forward to its continued positive contribution in the post-transition peace-building phase.
Part of the UNSOM mandate is to assist with peace building and reconciliation, and to assist the Somalis with the creation of a federal state. And I have come today to hear the advice and the wisdom from President Farole on those subjects. And we've had an excellent discussion, and I am sure that together the United Nations and all parties within Somalia will work closely to make a better future for everyone.
It's time now for another quick break, but when we come back.
Without ensuring the health and overall well-being of our peoples, we cannot be able to guarantee the sustainability of the robust economic growth.
African leaders call for increased funding to contain HIV, AIDS, TB and malaria. Watching Africa Live. African leaders have called for increased funding to contain HIV, AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria. This as a continental health summit opened in Nigeria's capital. United Nations Population Fund Executive Director Babatunde Osetemihen pointed key gains made against the disease over the last decade. Babatunde says that in 2001, HIV treatment in Africa was almost non-existent, but 11 years later, more than 7 million people were receiving antiretroviral therapy. However, he says that increased domestic and international funding was needed to maintain momentum, a call that was seconded by those in attendance.
Without ensuring the health and overall well-being of our peoples, we cannot be able to guarantee the sustainability of the robust economic growth that we have been able to achieve over the last decade. That's why expanding universal access to health services is our country's is very critical.
Sudan's President Omar al-Bashir has left Nigeria. That's with the International Criminal Court demanding his arrest. He'd been in Abuja for an African Union summit but left after just 4 hours. CCTV's Chima Nwanko has more.
Several African leaders are here for a 2-day African Union summit on HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria. And Sudan's leaders reportedly had been due to address them. Officials were surprised that Omar Hassan al-Bashir left so soon. His departure comes following a storm of protests about his visits. The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for Bashir. It claims he committed genocide in Darfur. Bashir has consistently denied those charges and says that they are politically motivated. Meanwhile, Nigeria is a signatory to the International Criminal Court, and a human rights group went to court in Nigeria to force the government to arrest him. The African Union has advised its members to ignore the arrest warrants. Nigeria's Foreign Affairs Minister Olugbenge Ashiru says the country's commitment to the African Union is more important than its obligations to the ICC. There's talk that Bashir suspected his security had been breached, but the Sudanese government says that he had another engagement. Chima Nwanko, CCTV, Abuja.
Now let's move to South Africa, where a young graffiti artist is using his skills to capture the image of former president and anti-apartheid hero Nelson Mandela. He believes it will help spread the iconic leader's message of peace, love and forgiveness. Clementine Logan has more.
Nelson Mandela's life is now sprayed across part of South Africa's most famous township, Soweto. Stretching across Mkhize Street, Nkululeka Mahlangu's mural puts Mandela's history in pictures, from a young man to becoming president of South Africa. Mahlangu says since the father of the nation was hospitalized over a month ago, demand for his image has soared. He believes his artwork is a form of public service.
We had to do this mural because one is in front of our community. That means the tourists will come here. Not only that there were our primary or secondary focus, Ours is for the community to get the message.
Mahlangu uses stencils and black spray paint on any flat or recycled surface he can find. And as Mandela's 95th birthday approaches, he says there's plenty more in the pipeline.
I'll be here working forever. I believe the Mandela Day should be not dedicated, should be a one-day event, We should celebrate his life each day as we live, to bring change,
Mahlangu says he hopes his art will inspire a younger generation to respect their heritage and give back to their communities.
If we celebrate Mandela birthday, let it not be a month or a day or those 27 or 67 minutes, We should be wholly, dedicate ourselves and make sure we pray and we continue where he left off. We picked up where he left off.
With Soweto's youth forging their own identity, often through art or music, Mahlangu says he hopes that in their quest to define their future, they don't forget those who helped shape it. Clementine Logan, CCTV.